A priest knelt at the altar of the god of time while his city burned around him. Behind him, pressed into the corners of the chapel, a few dozen people who had not yet died were waiting to learn whether they would. Smoke came in under the doors in slow grey ribbons and pooled along the stone floor. Out in the streets of Kvatch, something that was not a man, and had never been a man, was moving from house to house, and the screaming had been going on long enough that it had begun to sound less like screaming and more like weather. The priest pressed his palms together. He asked Akatosh to spare the people behind him. He did not know, he could not have known, that the god he was praying to was already listening, not from some far heaven, from inside his own blood. The one thing in all the world that could close the burning gate pouring fire into his city was not on its way to save him. It was him. The answer to the prayer was the man who was saying it, and he had no idea. Settle in. There's no rush here. Let the fire in this story stay in the story. Because this is the year the world very nearly ended, and the man at the center of it never wanted to be anyone at all. He thought he was a farmer's son. He turned out to be the only person alive who could hold back a god, and he could only do it by ceasing to exist. There is one fact sitting at the heart of all this, a fact about a single object that every person in the story will bleed to protect, that I want to keep until we have earned it. When it finally arrives, it will change what every sacrifice before it actually meant. For now, hold on to the priest in the burning chapel. We will come back to him before the end. He will not be a man the next time we do. The man who ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen could not command the one thing every beggar in his streets took for granted: his own sleep. For 65 years, Uriel Septim VII had worn the weight of the ruby throne. He had outlived rebellions and impostors and a decade-long imprisonment in a realm outside of time. He was old now, in the way that thrones make men old, and at night, when the palace went quiet and the lamps burned low in the white gold tower, the dreams came for him. The same dreams for years. He saw the gates of Oblivion swing wide. He saw, in his own words, a darkness sweeping the land that no waking eye was ever meant to look upon. He woke from these dreams knowing things he had no way of knowing, and he carried that knowing through his days like a stone in the chest. That was the strange tragedy of Uriel Septim. He could see the future. He simply could not change it. And then, on one ordinary night, the dream walked in through the door. Assassins came over the palace walls in the dark, men in red who moved without fear of death. And before the night was finished, all 3 of the emperor's grown sons were dead. His blades, the sworn knights who had guarded the Septim line for generations, closed around the old man and pulled him down into the dungeons beneath the tower, toward a secret passage built for exactly this kind of night. The escape route ran, by pure accident, straight through the cell of a condemned prisoner. A stranger, a nobody, waiting out the last of a sentence. The emperor stopped at that cell. He looked at the prisoner's face for a long moment, and then he said something that no one with him could explain. He said he had seen this face before, in his dreams. He said the stars were right, and that this was the day. He pardoned a condemned criminal he had never met, on the spot, for no reason any of his guards could understand. He pressed into the stranger's hands a heavy amulet set with a great red stone, and told them to carry it to a monk named Joffrey, who would know how to find the emperor's last hidden heir. He warned, almost gently, that there would be blood and death before the end. Then a panel in the wall slid open. A red blade came through it, and the most powerful man in the world fell to the dungeon floor and did not get up. So the last act of an emperor's life was to obey a dream. And the terrible part, the part worth staying awake for, is this. The dream was right about every single thing. Far to the west, in the city of Kvatch, there lived a quiet man named Martin who had never once dreamed of being important. He was a priest, not a grand one, a working clergyman in the chapel of Kvatch, the kind who tends candles and listens to the grief of strangers and reads the old liturgy aloud to a half-empty hall on cold mornings. He believed himself the son of a farmer. He had a farmer's hands and a farmer's plainness about him, and if you had passed him in the street, you would have forgotten his face by the next corner. He wanted nothing the world considered worth wanting. He had found after a long road a kind of peace, but peace is not the same thing as innocence, and Martin had a road behind him that he did not talk about. Once, when he was young, he had gone looking for power in the dark. He had fallen in with others who studied the forbidden arts, who summoned things from the realms beyond the world to see what those things might teach them. He was clever and curious, and he did not understand what he was reaching toward. And then, one day, a summoning went wrong. Terribly, finally wrong. And friends of his died in front of him because of a door he had helped to open. He never gave the details. He carried them the way you carry a thing too heavy to set down. That is the part most people never learn about him. The man who would one day shut the doors of Oblivion forever had once, with his own hands, helped to open one. And it had cost him people he loved. He turned away from all of it after that. A priest found him in the wreckage of who he'd been and showed him another way, and Martin gave himself wholly to the Nine, and most of all to Kvatch, the great dragon, the god of time, the steady turning of the world that asks nothing of you but that you endure it. He spent years at that altar making himself small and good and useful. He thought he was atoning. He thought the worst thing he would ever do was already behind him. He did not know that his real father had never been a farmer at all. He did not know that the man who sired him had handed him to a monk as an infant and watched his progress from a distance for the rest of his life, never once daring to meet him, because to claim him would have been to mark him for death. He did not know that the blood moving quietly through his ordinary body was the rarest blood in the world. He was praying to the god of time. The god of time was his ancestor, and the prayer and the answer were standing in the same room, and neither of them knew it yet. That is who he was, on the morning the sky over Kvatch turned the color of a wound. The fires reached Kvatch first, before they reached anywhere else, and there was a reason for that, though no one inside the walls understood it at the time. A great burning gate had torn itself open on the road below the city, a hole in the world rimmed in fire, and out of it had come the Daedra. Things with too many limbs and the wrong number of eyes, pouring up the mountain road into the streets. The city watch died in the squares. The count died in his castle. Most of the people died in their homes or in the open, and the few who lived ran for the one building that still held. The chapel of Kvatch, where a plain priest was barring the doors and gathering the terrified inside, telling them in a steady voice that help would come. He had no reason to believe that. He said it anyway. And help did come, in the strangest possible shape. The stranger from the prison cell, the one the dead emperor had pardoned, the one now carrying that heavy red amulet across a collapsing province, arrived at the ruins of Kvatch looking for a priest named Martin. They learned the gate had to be closed before anyone could be saved, and so they did the thing no one else had been able to do. They walked into the burning gate, into the realm on the other side, and shut it from the inside. How, the records never say, only that it was done, and the fire stopped pouring, and the survivors lived. When the stranger finally reached the chapel and told Martin the truth, that the emperor was dead, that all his sons were dead, that Martin himself was the last living heir of the Septim line, the priest did not believe it. Why would he? He said it plainly. He was a priest of Akatosh. His father was a farmer. There had to be some mistake. But the proof was already smoking in the streets around him. An entire city had been razed to reach him. Hundreds of people had died, not for anything they had done, but because of who Martin secretly was. He stood in the ashes of his home and did the arithmetic out loud, almost to himself. An entire city destroyed to get at one priest, because that priest was the emperor's son. And slowly, terribly, he believed it. He had spent years making himself small so that he could never hurt anyone again. And now, without lifting a finger, simply by existing, he had become the reason a city was gone. There is a particular kind of horror in learning that you are important. Martin felt all of it. And then he picked up what was left of himself, and he agreed to go. To understand why a god wanted to eat the world, you have to understand that he had tried before, and that he had lost, and that he had not forgiven it. His name was Mehrunes Dagon, and among the princes of the realms beyond the world, he was the one the others did not love. His domain was destruction, change, revolution, the energy of things being torn down, the ambition that wants to remake everything by first reducing it to nothing. He was the earthquake and the flood and the fire that takes a city in a night. For uncounted ages he had reached toward the mortal world and been thrown back. He had been banished from a floating fortress of war mages by a single apprentice. He had been driven out of the great city of Mournhold and humiliated. He had broken pacts with his own kind again and again, until they quietly hated him, and still he could not stop reaching. And here is the detail worth holding, because it is the cold heart of everything that followed. In the realms beyond the world, nothing can truly be destroyed. Tear something down there, and it simply reforms. Ruin is never final. The rubble always reassembles. For a god whose entire nature is destruction, that is a kind of unending frustration, a craftsman who can never finish anything. There is only one place in all of creation where a thing, once destroyed, stays destroyed. One place where ending is real. The mortal world. Our world. He did not want to rule it. A god of destruction does not want a throne. He wanted the one place where his nature could finally, permanently mean something. He wanted the world because it was the only place where the world could actually end. To get there, he needed hands inside it, and he found them in a man named Mankar Cameron. Mankar was no ordinary cultist. He was the son of a notorious pretender, a being who may not have been entirely mortal himself, and Dagon had given him a book. A black book the prince had written with his own hand in the deserts of rust and wounds, called the Mysterium Xarxes. Mankar read it until it changed him. He wrote his own feverish commentaries on it, full of riddles and rapture, and around those writings he built a cult, the Mythic Dawn. To them, Dagon was not a demon. He was a liberator. They believed the world was rightfully his, that the order of things was a cage, and that the coming destruction would not be an ending, but a dawn, a paradise on the far side of fire. Mankar even built that paradise. Using the power of the Black Book, he carved out his own private realm and named it for the beauty he believed the world would wear once Dagon had remade it. It was there, behind a door no mortal could open, that he fled with the stolen amulet, certain he had already won. He had not. but he had every reason to think so. Because the thing his cult had broken on the night they killed the Emperor was not a man. It was a promise older than the Empire itself. Everything in this story turns on that heavy red amulet, the one a dying emperor pressed into a stranger's hands, the one a cult was willing to burn a city to steal. So before we go any further, it is worth slowing down to ask what it actually was. The common answer, the one most people in the world would have given, was simple. The Amulet of Kings was a holy relic, a crown jewel of the Septim line. When a new emperor was raised, he wore it to a temple in the heart of the imperial city and used it to light a sacred fire called the Dragon Fires. And so long as the dragon-blooded line kept those fires lit, the gates of the dark realms stayed shut, and the world stayed safe. That was the bargain everyone knew. Wear the amulet, light the fire, keep the doors closed. It is a clean story. It is also not the whole of it. And the part that is missing is the part that breaks your heart. The bargain went back to the very first age of men, to a slave queen named Alessia who rose against the cruel elven lords who had ruled her people for 1,000 years. The old accounts say she did not win that war alone. The god of time himself looked down on the suffering of mortals and made her a covenant, and the words of it matter, so listen to them. He named himself the King of Spirits, and he named her the Queen of Mortals, and he swore that so long as her blood and her oath held true, his blood and his oath would hold true to her in return. He would stand witness for all the gods. She would stand witness for all the living. And as the seal of that promise, he reached into his own breast and drew out a burning handful of the blood of his own heart and gave it into her hands. That is what the amulet is. Not a jewel, not a crown, a god's heart's blood, cooled into a token, carried against the chests of her descendants for the better part of 4,000 years. So long as one of her line wore it, the old covenant said, the eternal fire would burn and the dark would be held back. But the covenant said something else too, something the liturgy only whispers. It said that if ever the fires failed and no heir of the joined blood wore the token, then the empire would fall into darkness, and the demon lords of misrule would govern the land. The mythic Dawn had read that part very carefully. That was the whole plan. Kill every drop of the blood. Snuff the fire. Let the doors fall open. What none of them understood, what Martin himself did not yet understand, riding in silence toward a fortress in the mountains with a god's blood now lost to his enemies, was that the covenant had never really been a shield at all. For weeks, Martin did everything a hero in an old song is supposed to do, and he did it knowing he was no hero. He hid in a cold mountain fortress and bent his ruined mind to the Black Book, deciphering the cult's terrible writings page by page, because he was the only one who could. He sent his strange friend, the prisoner-turned-champion, to recover lost things and slay spies and walk into realms of fire. When a great gate threatened the nearby city of Bruma, Martin made a decision that no one expected of a gentle priest. He let it open. He stood on the field himself, in the recovered armor of the first Septim Emperor, his own distant grandfather, and led mortal men against the legions of a god. They won. They tore from the gate the very thing they needed to open the door to Mankar's paradise, and the champion went through it and came back with the amulet, and the people cheered Martin in the streets as the last true heir, the emperor at last. He let them cheer. He knew something they did not, because while he was reading that Black Book, Martin had understood the covenant in a way no priest before him ever had. He had seen the shape of the thing underneath the thing. The bargain was never a shield, It was a debt. When the god of time reached into his own chest and gave a slave queen a handful of his heart, he was not handing her a lock. He was making a loan, against the future, with a price written into it that would only ever come due once. The fires, the bloodline, the amulet passed down through age after age of emperors. All of it was the slow accrual of a single payment that the world would someday have to make. The Covenant did not promise that the doors would stay shut forever for free. What Martin had come to understand, deciphering it page by page, was darker, that when the worst hour came, a way to shut them forever would exist, and that the way would ask a single life of the joined blood, freely given. That is the fact I asked you to hold from the very beginning. Here it is. The thing everyone in this story was fighting to protect was the price itself, and the last person alive who could pay it was a priest who thought he was a farmer's son. Every time someone bled to keep the amulet safe, they were carrying Martin closer to the altar where he would have to destroy it. Every time the champion recovered it, fought for it, walked through fire for it, they were not saving a relic, they were delivering a sacrifice to the place it was needed. The cult thought they had broken the covenant by stealing the blood. They had done the opposite. They had set in motion the only chain of events that could ever call the debt in. And the boy who once opened a door to the dark and lost his friends to it was about to close the doors of the dark forever by giving the god of time back the heart he had loaned to the world. Not a victory, a funeral. The story had simply been kind enough not to tell him until it had to. What undoes me about Martin is that he could have run. He was not bound to that altar by prophecy, the way his father had been bound to his dreams. He had a friend, the champion, the one who had carried him out of the ashes of Kvatch, and that friend would have fought the whole world to keep him alive. He could have hidden. He could have refused. The amulet was reclaimed. The dragonfires could, in theory, have been lit the old way, the safe way, and the fragile bargain restored for another span of years, kicking the price down the road to some descendant who did not yet exist. But Martin had read the book. He knew that the old way only ever bought time. He knew that as long as the bargain held in its first form, the world would always need a septim, always need the blood, always need someone to wear a god's heart against their chest and stand between the living and the dark. He knew, in other words, that the safe choice was not safe at all. It only moved the funeral to a stranger's house. There was one more thing he understood, reading between those final pages. The choice he was about to make would not only end the threat. It would end the need for everything that had protected against it, the blood, the line, the long inheritance of sacrifice, forever. He was not closing a door. He was removing the hinges, so he chose the other thing. And then the choice was taken out of his hands anyway, the way these things always are, because before Martin could perform the careful ritual he had planned, Dagon grew impatient and tore the world open himself, in the heart of the imperial city, in the shadow of the white gold tower, the day Martin came to be crowned at last. He never wore the crown. There was no time. The messenger ran into the council chamber to say the gates were opening inside the city walls, and the man who had spent his life making himself small looked around at the panic, and became, in a single breath, exactly what his blood had always made him. He gave the order. Not to the palace, not to safety, to the temple of the One, where the dragon fires waited cold. He cut a path through a city full of fire with his friend at his side, mortal men dying around him for a priest from a burned town. And he did not stop, and he did not look back. And at the doors of the temple a god was waiting for him. This is the man who once helped open a door to the dark and watched it kill the people he loved. He had spent every year since on his knees, begging a god to forgive him for the harm a single doorway can do. Now he walked toward the largest doorway ever opened to close it with his own death. Not atonement. Something larger than atonement. He had become the answer to the prayer he had been saying his whole life. He simply had to die to finish it. The god of destruction came up through the floor of the world in the heart of the imperial city, and he was enormous. 4 arms, a crown of fire. Taller than the towers, wading through the streets toward the temple where the last septim stood. A being whose entire nature was the ending of things. Arrived at last in the one place where endings are real. He had waited eras for this. He menaced the small mortal man before him, a priest in borrowed armor, a nobody from a dead city, and the small man did not run. Martin turned to his friend. He said the things you say when you know you will not speak again. That he could not stay to rebuild what was coming. That the work of the future belonged to others now. That in the short time he had known this strange champion, he had been a good friend. And then he said the line that still goes through me, simple as a closing door. The dragon waits. He turns. He runs the last steps to the altar. And he does the thing the Covenant has been saving since the first age of men. He shatters the amulet of kings. He brings a god's heart's blood down against the stone and breaks it open. And in the breaking the loan comes due, and the payment is made, and the blood of the dragon and the blood of the priest become one thing at last. Light tears out of him. The temple dome explodes inward as Dagon's claws come down. And where a quiet, frightened, deeply ordinary man was standing, there rises into the broken sky a vast golden dragon wreathed in holy fire, the avatar of the god of time, called back into the world by the only descendant left who can call him. The two of them fill the heavens over the city, immortal against immortal, the thing that builds against the thing that ruins, the loan and the lender meeting in the air above a burning capital. And at the end of it, the great gold dragon drives down and closes its jaws on the neck of the Prince of Destruction and finishes him with a single breath of sacred fire. And Mehrunes Dagon, the god who reached for the world across 1,000 years and 100 defeats, is thrown back into the dark, his body unmade, the gates slamming shut behind him. And then the most beautiful and unbearable thing happens. The dragon does not fly away in triumph. It arches its long neck toward the sky, and it roars once, and it turns to stone. Right there, atop the ruined temple, in the place where the doors of the world had been held closed. The fire goes still inside it. The priest who begged a god to spare his city has become the god, and the god has spent himself saving the world, and what is left is a statue and a silence. The last of the septims, he had said as the light took him, passed now into history. He went gladly because he knew the cost would not be wasted. He had been right about that too. Here is the part of the story that I find hardest to say softly, and so I will just say it. The world did not remember. Martin's death did not merely close the gates that day. It changed the bargain itself, forever. By giving the heart back, by becoming the avatar and spending it, he made the barrier between the worlds self-sustaining. No emperor would ever again need to wear the amulet. No dragon fires would ever again need to be lit. The whole 3,000-year purpose of the bloodline, the blood, the token, the eternal flame, the long chain of kings, had existed to produce one single act, and that act erased the need for any of it ever again. The line was made to end itself, and it did. So there was no new emperor. There could not be. The blood was gone, willingly, completely. The great Septim Empire, the thing that had held a continent together for centuries, began to come apart at the seams almost at once, because the keystone had pulled itself out of the arch to save the building, and a building cannot thank a keystone. Far away, on the bright isles in the western sea, the elves had watched their own land assaulted by the Daedra, and had been saved, like everyone else, by Martin's sacrifice in a city they would never see. They did not know what had saved them. So a rising faction of those elves simply took the credit for the rescue, declared themselves the saviors of their people, and used that lie to climb to power. 200 years later, the descendants of that lie would march across the world in a war that would put a chokehold on faith itself. And a soldier born in the cold north would sit in a cart, hands bound, rolling toward a headsman's block, in a province torn apart by a conflict that traced all the way back, link by link, to a priest who turned to stone and was forgotten. And in that same cold north, in a snowbound town, a man would one day open a little museum. Glass cases, locked displays, the relics of the very cult that had murdered an emperor and burned Kvatch and tried to feed the world to a god, kept now as curiosities, dusted and labeled, a point of strange family pride. The dagger of the Prince of Destruction, broken into 3 pieces by frightened descendants and scattered so it could never be whole again. The last surviving page of the Black Book, a scrap of a robe. The whole apocalypse reduced to things behind glass that travelers wander past on a snowy afternoon and barely slow down to read. No one builds a museum for Martin. There is no glass case for the priest who gave back a god's heart. There is only a stone dragon on a ruined temple in a fading city, and most people who pass beneath it could not tell you whose face it wore. That is the thing most people miss about saving the world. It does not love you back. It cannot. It simply goes on being the world, which is the only thanks a sacrifice ever really gets. And if you do it right, the only thanks it ever really wanted. Go back now to the beginning. To the priest kneeling at the altar of the god of time while his city burned, hands pressed together, asking Akatosh to spare the people behind him. He never got the answer he was praying for. Kvatch was not spared. The people behind him were not all saved. The prayer of a frightened man in a burning chapel went, in the small sense, unanswered. But the larger answer was already moving, not down from the heavens, but up through his own blood, toward a temple and an altar and a single broken stone. The God he begged did come. The God he begged was him. And the fire he knelt and begged to be delivered from became, in the end, the fire he breathed to deliver everyone else. The same kneeling man. The same fire. Turned by everything in between into the thing that ends the very thing he feared. That is what the story actually means, I think, underneath all the gates and gods and burning cities. It means that sometimes the thing we are most afraid of, having inside us, turns out to be the only thing that can save the people we love, and that we don't get to find out which it is until the worst hour comes. Martin spent his whole life believing the darkest thing about himself was true. He was wrong. The blood he feared was the blood that closed the doors. You are carrying something too. Everyone is. Some inheritance you did not ask for, some weight handed to you by people who couldn't carry it themselves, some part of you that you have decided is a burden or a flaw or a door you once opened that you can never take back. You may go your whole life believing it is the worst of you. You will probably never get the proof Martin got. But it is worth wondering, on a quiet night, whether the thing you've been kneeling against all these years might turn out in the end to be the thing that saves someone. If you'd like to keep stories like this one with you on the nights when you want to stay inside a world a little longer, the like and subscribe buttons keep this small fire burning, and there's always another world waiting for us when you're ready. For now, though, there is nothing left to do. The gates are shut, and they will stay shut. The fire over the temple has gone quiet and cool. High above a fading city, a dragon of stone holds its last roar against a sky that has finally stopped burning. And far below it, the snow keeps falling on a little town in the north, settling soft and white over the glass cases, over the broken dagger, over everything anyone tried to keep. Let it fall, let it cover all of it, and let yourself at last rest.